"What kind of game are you playing, old man?" The voice sliced through the early Virginia mist, sharp and cold as the morning air rolling off the Chesapeake. Captain Thorne's tone carried the polished arrogance of command, a man used to obedience, not questions. The old pickup truck idled just outside the main gate of Naval Station Norfolk, its paint sun-faded, its bed lined with dust and memory. Inside, behind the cracked windshield, sat an old man in a worn ball cap, hands resting on the steering wheel as though holding something invisible, something he was not ready to put down. Thorne stepped closer, boots crunching gravel, his reflection stretching across the truck's hood. "I said identification." The old man did not flinch. He turned his head slowly, revealing a weathered face lined by years of salt air and storms, not the kind at sea, but the kind that carved themselves into the soul. His eyes, grey as spent gunmetal, studied the young officer in silence. A second security sailor shifted beside the captain, uneasy. The sun had not yet cleared the hangars beyond the gate, and the base was waking. Hum of engines, flag rising, gulls circling above the bay. But something about the moment felt wrong. Too still, too measured. Finally the old man spoke. "Son, I've been coming through this gate since before your mother learned to walk. You sure you want to keep me waiting here?" Thorne frowned, straightening his uniform. "You will address me as Captain Thorne, sir. This is a restricted area. Now produce your credentials before I have you escorted off the premises." The old man reached slowly for his jacket pocket, the motion deliberate. The younger sailor's hand twitched near his holster, but the veteran only drew out a folded leather wallet, cracked and faded. Inside was a laminated card, the edges frayed. He handed it through the window. Thorne snatched it and scanned the text. His brow furrowed. "Retired Chief Petty Officer James R. Calder, Hammer Squadron 6. Thorne exhaled through his nose, unimpressed. "Hammer 6? Never heard of it. Looks like an old logistics unit. These IDs are no longer valid, Chief. Regulations changed years ago." The old man's eyes lifted toward the flag now climbing the pole. His voice, quiet but firm, carried the weight of something unspoken. "Regulations may change, Captain, but respect should not." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the hum of the gate motor seemed to pause. Thorne leaned in, voice dropping. "You think your time in the service gives you special privilege? You are on my base now." Chief Calder's hand tightened on the wheel, knuckles pale. "Your base?" he echoed softly, almost to himself. Then turning those steel-grey eyes on Thorne again, he said, "This was ours long before you wore those bars, son. Men bled here. Men you'll never know." The words landed like slow thunder. The younger sailor shifted again, uncomfortable. There was something in Calder's tone, not defiance, but gravity. Thorne straightened, jaw tightening. "Escort him off. If he wants to reminisce, he can do it from the public side of the fence." The sailor hesitated. "Sir, maybe we should—" "Now, petty officer." Calder exhaled and turned off the ignition. The engine sputtered into silence, leaving only the wind. He stepped out, boots hitting gravel with the unhurried weight of someone long past being intimidated. He stood straight, spine like a mast, hat brim shading his eyes. "I came to deliver something," he said quietly. "For the Admiral," Thorne raised an eyebrow. "The Admiral? Which one?" "Doesn't matter. He'll know. You expect me to believe that?" Calder reached into the truck bed and lifted a small olive-drab case. It was metal, dented, marked with faded stenciling. Hammer 6, property of Navy Dep't. Thorne's gaze hardened. "What's in it?" Calder looked past him, toward the distant hangars, where jets shimmered in the dawn light. "History," he said. A moment later, 2 MPs arrived in a patrol vehicle, tires crunching to a stop. Thorne gestured sharply. "Escort this man off base, and confiscate that case until I verify his story." Calder did not resist. He simply looked at the young captain one last time and said, quietly, "You're going to wish you had not done that." "Son." His voice held no threat, only certainty. The MPs took the case and led him toward the gatehouse. Thorne turned away, tapping his tablet, already dismissing the encounter. Yet something about the old man's presence lingered, like a storm building, just beyond radar range. As the patrol car pulled away, one of the security crew noticed a small patch lying in the gravel near the truck's tire. He bent down and picked it up. It was a faded triangular insignia, a silver hammer crossed with wings. The stitching was old, the kind no one used anymore. "Sir," the sailor called. "He dropped this." Thorne glanced at it. "Trash. Log it and move on." The sailor hesitated, then pocketed it instead. He did not know why, only that something about the emblem felt wrong to throw away. Behind them the sun broke over the horizon, washing the base in gold. Somewhere a bugle call echoed, solemn and distant, and inside a quiet patrol car rolling toward the visitor lot, Chief James Calder watched the flag rise. His reflection in the glass was tired but steady. Under his breath, he murmured words no one else could hear. "Never thought I'd have to come back here for this." He closed his eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, he was not 80 years old anymore. He was 30 again, standing on the deck of the USS Hawthorne, smoke and fire all around, headset crackling. "Hammer 6, you're clear to engage," the voice had said. He could still hear it, still feel the heat, still remember the faces. The past was not done with him yet. The office of Admiral Charles Wexler was a museum of quiet authority. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows overlooking the bay, catching the glass frames that lined the walls. Commendations, black and white photos, fragments of ships now rusting at the bottom of oceans. Each told a story of command, of decisions that had never left him. He stood at the window now, coffee cooling beside an untouched file, when the intercom crackled. "Sir," came the orderly's voice, "Captain Thorne is here." "He says it's urgent," Wexler sighed. The day had barely begun. "Send him in." The door opened, and Captain Thorne stepped smartly inside, his posture clipped and precise. He carried an olive-drab case under one arm. "Morning, Captain," Wexler said without turning. "What brings base security to my desk at this hour?" "An incident at the main gate, Admiral." "Incident." Thorne placed the case on the Admiral's desk. An unidentified civilian attempted entry, claimed to be a retired Chief Petty Officer James Calder. He carried this. Wexler's eyes narrowed at the name. He turned slowly. "Calder?" "Yes, sir." He presented an outdated ID and insisted he was here to see you personally. "I had him detained for questioning." The man was insistent. Wexler stepped closer, resting a hand on the case. The metal was cold, dented, and familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. The faded stenciling read, "Hammer 6, property of Navy Dept. Where is he now?" Wexler asked quietly. Detained at the visitor facility awaiting clearance, the Admiral's gaze did not move from the case. "Release him immediately," Thorne blinked. "Sir?" "Captain, do I need to repeat myself?" "No, sir." "But if I may—" "You may not," Wexler said, his voice flat but firm. "That man is not to be detained." "Escort him to me personally." Thorne hesitated, confused. "Admiral, with respect, this man challenged authority at the gate. He disrespected the chain of command." "I cannot—" "Captain," Wexler interrupted, turning his full gaze upon him. "Chief Calder commanded more respect in one mission than most officers will in a lifetime. You will treat him accordingly." The silence stretched, heavy and sharp. Thorne straightened, color rising in his face. "Understood, sir." He turned on his heel and left, the door closing behind him with a controlled click. Wexler exhaled, staring at the old case. For the first time in years, his hands trembled. He sank into the leather chair and ran a thumb over the lid, tracing the embossed numbers, 6/1779, the date seared into memory. He unlatched the metal clasps. They creaked like old hinges in a forgotten ship. Inside lay a folded American flag, slightly faded, and beneath it a tarnished compass. The lid bore a single inscription etched in blackened steel, "For those who carried the hammer when the storm came." His throat tightened. He had not seen this compass since the night the USS Hawthorne burned in the Gulf. At the same moment, outside in the visitor lot, the MPs were releasing Chief Calder from holding. The younger one handed back his wallet. "Apologies, Chief. Orders from the Admiral." Calder nodded without a word. He noticed the other sailor, the one who had pocketed his patch earlier, standing nearby watching. Their eyes met briefly, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. "Sir," the sailor said quietly, "you dropped this." He held out the patch. Calder took it gently, thumb brushing the frayed edges. "Appreciate it, son. Was that really your unit?" the sailor asked. Calder's eyes lifted toward the base skyline, cranes, ships, the sound of jet turbines. "It was once," he said softly. "But some things never stay buried." Back in the Admiral's office, Thorne re-entered, now slightly pale. Behind him, Calder stepped through the doorway, his movements slow but sure, eyes scanning the room like a man walking into a memory. For a moment, neither spoke. Wexler rose from behind his desk. His voice, when it came, was quieter than Thorne had ever heard it. "Chief Calder." Calder's jaw tightened. "Admiral Wexler, you look older," Wexler said with a faint, sad smile. "So do you." The two men regarded each other, not as superior and subordinate, but as survivors. The air in the room thickened with the weight of unspoken years. Thorne stood uncertainly to the side, trying to understand the exchange. Calder's eyes fell on the case resting open on the desk. "You kept it," he said. "I did," Wexler replied. "Though I thought it was lost forever." Calder nodded once. "Everything worth keeping gets lost for a while." Wexler motioned to the chairs. "Sit, Chief." Calder did not move. "Not until I say what I came to say." Thorne shifted. "With respect, sir, this man—" "Captain," Wexler cut him off. "You are here to listen, not to speak." Thorne's mouth closed. Calder set his cap on the desk. "I came because the truth was buried under medals and paperwork. Because men died carrying out orders they did not understand. And because someone needs to remember what Hammer 6 really was." The Admiral's face hardened. "You think I have forgotten? I think you remember the part that lets you sleep." The words landed like an old wound, reopened. Thorne watched, trying to piece together the fragments. "Sir, what was Hammer 6? Neither man answered him immediately. Finally, Wexler said, "A mission that never officially existed." Calder's eyes were distant now, staring past them both. "And one that should never have been given." The Admiral's voice dropped. "We saved lives that day." Calder shook his head. "We buried them." The room fell into silence again, long, heavy, suffocating. At last, Wexler closed the case and placed his hand atop it. "There are files you will never see, Captain. Stories that will never make their way into training manuals. Hammer 6 was one of them. But the men who carried that call sign, they paid for our peace with everything they had." Calder's gaze softened slightly. "That is why I came, Admiral. To remind you that their names deserve to be spoken before the last of us forgets how." Wexler nodded slowly, emotion flickering behind the steel of command. Thorne, silent, looked between them, two relics of a war he had only read about, bound by something larger than orders. Finally, Calder took his cap and turned toward the door. "You still have the compass?" Wexler opened the case again, lifted the old instrument, and placed it gently in Calder's hand. "Always points home," the Admiral said quietly. Calder nodded once. "Then maybe it's time to follow it." He turned and left the room without another word. When the door closed, Wexler remained standing, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Thorne finally spoke, voice low. "Sir, who is he?" The Admiral's gaze remained fixed on the empty doorway. "The kind of man who built the Navy you serve, Captain. And the kind you had better learn to recognize before you find yourself saluting a ghost. The sea remembers, even when men try to forget. The ocean keeps its ghosts, folded beneath the waves, waiting for silence to break." Chief James Calder stood at the edge of the pier later that afternoon, wind pressing against his jacket, eyes on the water where the sunlight scattered like shattered glass. The modern destroyers moored nearby hummed with power, steel and precision, untouched by the salt and smoke that had marked his generation. He could hear the gulls, the creak of ropes, the low whistle of the bay. But in his mind, another sound began to rise, the roar of turbines, the scream of fire. It was 1979, the USS Hawthorne, CV-72, somewhere east of the Strait of Hormuz. The memory came alive in color and noise. Calder was 32 then. Flight deck chief. Hammer Squadron 6. Sweat and jet fuel clung to his skin as the sun burned low over the horizon. The air was thick with tension. Even the sea seemed to hold its breath. The crew moved in rhythm, each motion precise, rehearsed, sacred. F-4 Phantoms crouched at the catapults, ready to launch. Over the comms, voices barked through static. Launch cycle 4 in 2 minutes. Copy that. Hammer 6 on standby. Calder's headset crackled. Chief, we've got turbulence readings coming off the bow. Command wants confirmation before the next launch. Tell them we'll fly when we're green, not before, Calder said. His tone was even, controlled, the calm in chaos. A young pilot, barely 23, ran up beside him, helmet under his arm. Lieutenant Daniel Wexler, eager, fearless, eyes bright with the kind of confidence that had not yet met consequence. Chief, command says it's urgent. We're wheels up in 60, Calder looked at him. You ever seen a crosswind like that on this deck, son? Wexler shook his head. No, Chief, then we wait. The sea's telling us something, Wexler frowned. With respect, Chief, the sea doesn't issue orders. Calder's lips twitched. Not a smile, but close. No, but she sure as hell enforces them. Before Wexler could reply, the loudspeaker blared. All units prepare for scramble. Incoming distress call. Civilian tanker under attack off Sector 9. The deck exploded into motion. Calder grabbed his headset. Hammer 6, stand by for emergency launch. Repeat, emergency launch. Jets roared to life, heat waves shimmering across the deck. The carrier trembled under the surge. Wexler slid into his cockpit, the canopy sealing with a hiss. Hammer 6-1 ready for launch. 6-2, green and armed. 6-3, standing by. Calder's voice cut through the comms. Hammer 6, you are go on my mark. Bring them home. He raised his hand, paused as the wind shifted, then dropped it. The Phantoms leapt from the deck, vanishing into the storming sky. The Admiral's office had smelled the same all those years ago. Oil, metal, paper, power. Calder could still see the faces of the men who had not returned. He remembered the explosion, the tanker burning, the silence on the radio when Hammer 6-2 failed to respond. He remembered Wexler's voice, young and steady, even as his jet took flak. Chief, I've got eyes on survivors. Going in low. Negative 6-1. Pull up, you're too close to static. Then fire. The flash tore through the horizon. The tanker's hull split open, black smoke twisting skyward. Calder's headset filled with chaos, half words, half screams. 6-1 hit. He's hit, then nothing. Calder had stood frozen, hand still gripping the radio. The deck around him was a blur of shouting crewmen, alarms, and the smell of burning fuel. He had thought they were all gone, until hours later, when a rescue chopper brought back one survivor. Lieutenant Daniel Wexler burned, barely conscious, clutching something in his fist, the compass, the same one now sitting in Calder's jacket pocket. Back in the present, the sound of boots approached along the pier. Calder did not turn. Chief Calder, came a voice, firm but uncertain. He recognized it without looking. Captain Thorne, Admiral Wexler requests your presence aboard the Hawthorne Memorial, sir. Calder's eyes stayed on the horizon. They kept her name alive, did they? Yes, Chief. The new destroyer was commissioned 5 years ago. She bears the old ship's bell. Calder nodded slowly. Then let us go hear it ring. They drove in silence toward the memorial berth, the base gliding past, hangars, cranes, the pier where sailors lined up for duty muster. Thorne stole glances at the old man beside him. Calder's face was calm, but his eyes were far away. Finally, Thorne spoke. You and the Admiral served together. Calder nodded. He was a boy when I met him. Thought orders could outshout the ocean. He learned otherwise. Thorne hesitated. You do not like officers much, do you? I like the ones who listen, Calder said. Problem is, most forget what silence sounds like once they start giving orders. Thorne looked down, unsure what to say. The vehicle turned down the last stretch of pier, where the gleaming hull of the USS Hawthorne DDG-147 loomed above the water, a name reborn in steel. The Admiral stood waiting at the gangway, dress uniform immaculate, cap tucked under his arm. The two men locked eyes again, this time without rank, without ceremony. "Chief," Wexler said. "Admiral." For a long moment, neither moved. The wind whipped across the water, snapping the flags overhead. Then Calder stepped forward and saluted. Crisp, steady, perfect. Wexler returned it slower, but just as firm. Thorne watched silently. Something in the gesture made his chest tighten. Something older than pride, deeper than command. "Come aboard," Wexler said. "There is something you should see." They climbed the gangway and crossed the deck, the metal warm beneath their boots. The ship was alive with quiet hums. Turbines deep below, radar turning, sailors moving in disciplined rhythm. Wexler led them below deck to a small chamber, a memorial room. Inside, the walls were lined with brass plaques bearing names. Above them hung the old ship's bell, polished to mirror brightness. Calder stepped closer, fingers tracing the engraved letters USS Hawthorne, CV-72, lost 1979. Beside it was a smaller plate, almost hidden, Hammer Squadron 6, never forgotten. He reached out and touched the cold metal. "So they did remember." Wexler's voice was quiet. "Not everyone." "But I did," Calder turned to him. "Then tell me, Admiral, why is my son's name not here?" The question struck like a round, fired in silence. Wexler froze. Thorne looked sharply at the veteran, stunned. "Your son?" Calder nodded slowly, eyes hardening. "Petty Officer First Class Michael Calder. Hammer 6-2. The one who never came back." The air thickened until even the hum of the ship seemed to stop. Wexler swallowed. "Chief, there are things you do not know about that mission." Calder's stare did not waver. "Then it is time you told me." The compartment was silent, except for the hum of the ship's ventilation. The walls seemed to press in, thick with history and unspoken ghosts. Calder stood still before the memorial plaque, his hand resting on his son's missing name. Admiral Wexler finally broke the silence. "Chief, come with me." He turned and led the way through a narrow passageway, down 2 ladders, and into a small, secure room marked authorized personnel only. The corridor lights flickered softly, painting the metal walls in shades of gold and gray. Inside, the air smelled faintly of oil and dust. A steel cabinet stood against the far wall, locked with a digital keypad. Wexler keyed in a code, the mechanism clicking open. From within, he pulled a single brown folder, the kind that carried more weight than any weapon. The top corner was stamped Classified, Hammer 6. He placed it on the table, eyes steady on Calder. "You deserve to know everything." Calder did not sit. He stood behind the chair, his hands gripping its back, the knuckles white. "You should have told me 40 years ago." Wexler nodded slowly. "I tried. They buried it before I could speak. The operation was sealed under joint command. I was ordered to stay silent." "Orders," Calder said, the word flat. "Always the orders." Thorne remained near the bulkhead, torn between duty and disbelief. "Sir, with respect, why reopen something classified for decades?" Wexler's gaze flicked to him. "Because some debts are not closed by time, Captain. They are only forgotten by convenience." He opened the file. The papers inside were yellowed, corners curled from years of confinement, diagrams, mission reports, handwritten notes, and a single photograph, taken aboard the original Hawthorne. In it, a younger Wexler stood beside Chief Calder, both men squinting into the sun. Between them was a third man, young, smiling, eyes sharp and certain. Michael Calder. Thorne leaned in slightly, his voice softer. "He looks like you, Chief." Calder did not answer. His eyes were locked on the photograph, the ghost of a smile trembling at the edges of memory. Wexler turned a page, revealing a mission summary typed in fading ink. Operation Hammer 6. Objective: intercept and recover unidentified foreign ordnance from distressed civilian vessel Falcon Star. Estimated threat level: unknown. Command authorization: Admiral T. Mathers. Status: mission compromised. Secondary detonation: vessel lost. Casualties classified. Calder's voice was low. Unidentified ordnance? That tanker wasn't civilian, was it? Wexler shook his head. No, it was carrying experimental munitions, a joint test shipment gone off record. Washington feared international backlash if word got out. They ordered us to intercept, neutralize, and destroy the evidence. And you sent my son to do it, he volunteered. Wexler said quietly. All of Hammer 6 did. We thought it was a recovery. We didn't know the container was armed. The ignition triggered the secondary blast. Calder's grip on the chair tightened. You knew something was off. You always did. I told you that day the winds were wrong, that the sea was changing. I remember, Wexler said. And I ignored you. Command was breathing down my neck. I was young, ambitious. I thought following orders made me strong. His voice cracked slightly. It made me blind. The words hung there, heavy, unflinching. Calder's eyes closed. He breathed deeply, slow, steady. And my boy paid the price. Yes, Wexler said. And so did I. He slid another paper forward, a faded casualty report. Calder, Michael R., presumed KIA, remains unrecovered. Calder stared at it for a long time. Then in a voice rough with the edges of grief, he said, You could have given him a name on that wall. That was all I asked for. I tried, Wexler said. They refused. Classified operations do not produce heroes, Chief. Only records that do not exist. Thorne swallowed hard. You mean the Navy erased them? Not erased, Wexler said bitterly. Just forgotten. The mission saved lives in the long run, stopped a weapon that could have killed thousands. But we were never meant to exist afterward. Calder opened his eyes, voice cold as the steel around them. And you obeyed. I obeyed, Wexler admitted. And I have lived with it every day since. The hum of the ship filled the silence that followed. At last, Wexler reached into his jacket and drew out a small black box. He opened it. Inside was a single medal, the Navy Cross. Tarnished, unpolished, never displayed. This was meant for him, the Admiral said quietly. I kept it, waiting for the day I could give it to someone who would understand what it cost. Calder looked at it, the silver cross gleaming faintly in the dim light. He did not reach for it. You can't pin that on a ghost, Admiral. No, Wexler said. But maybe you can carry it for him. Calder's eyes softened, but he said nothing. Thorne stepped closer. Sir, if I may speak freely, shouldn't this be known? The crew deserves recognition. Wexler looked at him, weary but sharp. You think the truth changes the past, Captain? No, Thorne said, voice steady. But it honors it. The Admiral studied him for a long moment. You remind me of him, you know. The same certainty, the same fire. Thorne blinked. You're Lieutenant Wexler? Wexler nodded faintly. He was my mirror, the best of us, until the day the mirror cracked. He closed the file and slid it across the table toward Calder.
Take it. It's yours now.
I will not stop you if you choose to make it known. Calder hesitated. And if I do? Then you will answer questions that men in suits have buried for decades. And they will come after you, or me. But perhaps that is justice enough. Calder finally sat. His voice was calm now, almost gentle. I did not come for revenge, Admiral. I came because men like my son should not fade in silence. If the Navy will not remember him, then I will. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the old compass, and placed it on the file. The lid gleamed faintly under the fluorescent light. Let it point the way this time, Calder said. Not to orders, not to protocol, to truth. The Admiral looked down at the compass, then at the man across from him. Then God help us both. A knock broke the moment. The door opened, and an ensign poked his head in. Sir, Evening Watch requests your signature for the security transfer logs. Later, Wexler said without turning. Understood. Sir, the ensign withdrew. When the door closed, Wexler exhaled and met Calder's eyes. There is one more thing you should know. The detonation that night, but it wasn't an accident. Calder froze. What did you say? Wexler's voice was steady now, but low. Someone triggered it. Hammer 6 was set up. Calder's heart hammered in his chest. By who? Wexler looked past him toward the steel wall, as if seeing through 40 years of silence. That, Chief, is what I have been trying to find out ever since. For a long moment, Calder didn't breathe. The word sabotage echoed in his head like the hollow thud of a shell casing hitting deck steel. He stared across the table at Wexler, who had gone utterly still, eyes shadowed beneath the fluorescent light. What do you mean? Calder said finally, voice rough, that it wasn't an accident. Wexler opened the file again, his hand trembling just slightly. The official report said a secondary explosion from unstable munitions caused the detonation, but there were inconsistencies. Timing, sequence, radio silence. I never believed it. He turned a page. 2 weeks after the incident, an internal memo from Naval Intelligence flagged possible foreign interference. But it disappeared before it reached the Joint Command Board. Disappeared, Calder repeated flatly. Yes, buried. Thorne frowned. Sir, are you suggesting an infiltration on a U.S. Navy destroyer? Wexler didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the compass Calder had placed on the vial, its glass cracked, needle quivering faintly under the ship's vibration. Then in a voice quiet as confession, he said, I'm suggesting it was one of ours. Calder's eyes hardened. You think someone on board sabotaged the mission? I don't think, Chief, Wexler said. I know. Flashback, 1983, North Atlantic, USS Hawthorne, DD 946. The wind screamed over the deck as the destroyer cut through black, violent seas. The sky was a bruised iron color, waves slamming against the hull like fists. Below deck in the command center, Lieutenant Michael Calder stood beside the radar console, headset tight against his ear. The screens flickered, static, blooming like white fireflies. Falcon Star still not responding, he reported. Signal distortion increasing, could be jamming. Commander Wexler, younger then, sharp, confident, leaned over the plotting table. Keep trying, Lieutenant. We're closing fast. The intercom crackled. Engine room reports temperature spike in the lower compartment, sir. Wexler frowned. Acknowledged. Send Chief Engineer Marks to check it. The storm deepened, rain hammering the bridge windows in sheets. Michael turned to his comms officer. What's our signal range to the Falcon? 2 nautical miles and closing, sir. No transponder response. Wexler's jaw tightened. Something's off. Civilian vessels don't travel this deep without escort. He looked at Michael. Arm the boarding team, quietly. Michael nodded, moving with calm precision. The team assembled. 6 men, each hand-picked, seasoned, steady. Hammer 6, Chief Calder, older then, but already legendary, watched from the engine room feed, pride and worry mixing behind his eyes. He had taught his son everything about machinery, survival, and loyalty. But there were things a father couldn't protect against. Back to present. Admiral's ready room. Calder's voice was hoarse. You're telling me my son was betrayed by one of his own? Wexler nodded slowly. After the explosion, we recovered partial comm logs. Someone triggered the detonation remotely, through an auxiliary line linked to the cargo bay controls. Only 3 officers had access to that circuit. Thorne looked between them. Who? Wexler hesitated. Lieutenant Commander Marks, Chief Engineer. Calder's eyes narrowed. Marks. He was my friend, my drinking buddy. And he was compromised, Wexler said grimly. We learned years later he'd been feeding information to a contractor with ties to foreign defense interests. Money, politics, leverage, the same old poison. Calder stepped back, fists clenching. And you knew this? I suspected, Wexler said. But by the time I had proof, it was too late. Marks was gone, discharged under medical grounds 3 months later. Died in a car accident before inquiry reopened. Calder's voice was low, dangerous. A car accident. Wexler met his eyes. A convenient one. The air between them thickened. Even Thorne felt the weight of something ancient, not just guilt or loss, but betrayal that spanned generations. Chief, Thorne said carefully, if this gets out, Calder cut him off. If this gets out, Captain, then maybe the Navy remembers what honor used to mean. He turned back to Wexler. You kept this buried to protect your own? Wexler slammed his fist on the table, the sharp sound echoing off the bulkhead. To protect the service, damn it. The Navy doesn't survive scandal, Calder. Not in the Cold War, not now. We were told to preserve stability, to bury mistakes before they sunk the fleet. Calder didn't flinch. You buried men, Admiral, not mistakes. The words landed hard, and for a moment even the air stopped moving. Then Wexler's voice dropped to a near whisper. "You think I don't know that?" He reached into the file again and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed, brittle. "I kept one thing from the investigation, a data strip, the final bridge log." He handed it to Thorne. "Play it." Thorne inserted the strip into the console. The screen flickered, then stabilized. A faint, static-laced recording played through the speakers. "Michael Calder, Hammer 6 boarding complete, cargo secured. Wait, what the hell?" Alarm blares. Unknown voice. "Negative contact if it's armed." Wexler, younger. "Abort. Hammer 6. Fall back. That's an..." Explosion. Deafening static. Transmission cuts. The sound faded into silence. Calder stood motionless, staring at the empty screen. The decades between that scream and this room vanished. He could almost smell the salt, the oil, the burning metal. "Now you hear it too," Wexler said softly. "That's what I've lived with every night since." Thorne shut off the console, throat tight. "What do we do now, sir?" Wexler leaned back, exhausted. "You'll both go home. Pretend this conversation never happened. I'll handle the rest." Calder shook his head. "No, this time, Admiral, you won't handle it alone." He gathered the file, the compass, and the medal. "You had your silence. I've had my grief. Now maybe it's time the truth had its turn." He started toward the hatch, but Wexler's voice stopped him. "Calder." The old chief turned. "If you go down this path," Wexler said, "you'll lose the Navy you love." Calder looked back, eyes steady. "Then I'll find the one my son died for." He left the room, boots echoing down the passageway, a rhythm that sounded like justice coming late but certain. The rain started just after dusk, slow, heavy drops that tapped against the rusted roof of the seaside inn, like a steady metronome marking time. Chief Michael Calder sat at the small wooden table by the window, the old compass lying open before him. Its cracked glass caught the glow of the lone bedside lamp. The needle wavered, north then off course, as though confused by the storm outside or the ghosts circling within. He hadn't spoken since leaving the base. The drive back down Shoreline Highway had been silent except for the rain and the low hum of the tires. Now, in the stillness of the room, his thoughts returned to the Falcon Star, the ghost ship that had ended everything. He poured a half measure of whiskey into the glass he'd brought from home, one of his son's old Navy-issue tumblers. The etched anchor logo caught the lamplight. "You'd have laughed at all this, boy," he said quietly, voice rough with the weight of years. "Said the old man's chasing shadows." He raised the glass in a muted toast. "Maybe I am." He drank, then opened the folder again. Photographs, grainy, faded edges curled from age. The Falcon Star, the wreck, the men. Hammer 6, every face was a memory, every name a ghost. Flashback, the night before the mission, 1983. The ship had been calm then, unnaturally calm. The wind outside the hull was howling, but inside the mess hall, the air was heavy with unspoken tension. Young Lieutenant Michael Calder sat alone at a corner table, turning his father's compass in his hands. His men joked nearby, their laughter forced, too loud. "Lieutenant," a voice called softly. He looked up. It was Chief Marks, the engineer. A big man, kind eyes, but something always guarded behind them. "Thought you might need this," Marks said, setting down a steaming mug of coffee. "Storm's gonna be rough," Michael nodded. "Thanks, Chief. You think we'll make contact?" Marks shrugged. "Depends on what we're really chasing, doesn't it?" Michael frowned. "You know something I don't?" Marks smiled faintly. "I know too much, son, and sometimes that's worse than knowing nothing at all." He tapped the table twice, then walked away, leaving Michael staring after him, uneasy without knowing why. Present, Seaside Inn. Norfolk. The knock came just past midnight. Calder froze, and instinctively reaching for the service revolver locked in his bag. He moved to the door, cautious, every step silent. Who is it? A pause, then a voice, faint, hoarse, but familiar. "Name's Cooper. I served on the Hawthorne." Calder opened the door. An old man stood there, rain-soaked and shaking slightly, a cane in his left hand and a plastic grocery bag under his arm. His hair was silver, his face deeply lined, but his eyes, pale, sharp, haunted, were unmistakable. "Lieutenant Paul Cooper," Calder said slowly. "Communications officer," Cooper nodded. "Aye, retired now. Mostly forgotten. Get in before you drown." He stepped aside. Cooper entered, water dripping onto the carpet. Calder handed him a towel. "How did you find me?" "I heard you went to the Admiral," Cooper said. "Word travels fast among ghosts." Calder sat opposite him. "You were on duty the night of the blast. You logged the final call." Cooper's hands trembled as he opened the grocery bag. Inside were 3 old cassette tapes wrapped in plastic. "They told me to destroy these." "I didn't," Calder stared. "What are they?" "Bridge recordings. Minutes before the Falcon Star went up." He set the first tape on the table. "You'll want to hear it." Calder fetched his old tape deck, a relic from another life, and slid the cassette in. The tape clicked, hissed, then began to play. Michael Calder, recording. "Hammer 6, ready to board. Standing by for clearance." Wexler, "Your go, Lieutenant." Pause. Static. Marks, "Fuel lines stable. Backup generator engaged." Unknown voice, barely audible. "Proceed as planned." Calder froze. "Wait, play that again." Cooper rewound the tape. Unknown voice. "Proceed as planned." "That's not Wexler," Calder said. "No," Cooper whispered. "That's Commander Marks. But the timestamp, it's after the engine room logged a shutdown. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the comm lines." Calder's eyes darkened. "He triggered it manually." Cooper nodded. "I think so. The Falcon wasn't a cargo ship, Chief. It was bait. A controlled leak to test response time. They didn't expect the detonation. Your boy wasn't supposed to die." Calder's jaw clenched. "He was expendable. The operation was top secret," Cooper continued. "If it failed, they'd bury it." "And they did." Calder sat back, the sound of the rain growing heavier. "Why tell me now?" he asked. "Because I'm dying," Cooper said simply. "Lung cancer. Probably earned from all those years breathing asbestos in the comm shack. I couldn't go out with this on my chest." He looked down at the compass. "That belonged to your son, didn't it?" Calder nodded once. "I gave it to him the night before." Cooper's voice softened. "He radioed once, just before the blast. Said, 'Tell the old man I found true north.'" The room went still. Calder's throat tightened. For the first time in years, he felt the sting of tears he refused to shed. "Why didn't you tell me then?" "They'd have court-martialed me," Cooper said. "And buried the tapes, again." He stood slowly, using his cane for balance. "You've got the proof now, Chief. Do what I never could." Calder reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, the one Wexler had given him earlier. "You said 3 tapes. The other 2? Cooper hesitated. "One's empty. The other—" He looked away. "You'll hear it when you're ready." He left without another word, disappearing into the rain, his figure swallowed by the night. Calder sat there long after, the compass open, the tape still spinning at its end. Outside, the storm began to ease, and in the lull between raindrops, the old chief whispered into the silence, not to the room, not even to the past, but to the one voice he still hoped could hear him. "I'm listening, son. I'm finally listening." The motel had gone quiet, the kind of silence that made the air hum. Even the rain had given up, leaving behind the steady drip of water sliding off the gutters into the dark. Chief Michael Calder sat exactly where Cooper had left him, elbows on the table, hands clasped, the compass between them like a small, glowing heart of memory. The whiskey glass sat empty. The second tape lay beside it. He stared at it for a long time. His instinct said to wait. His heart said to listen. He chose the latter. The tape clicked into the player, the old machine groaning like a tired witness called to testify one last time. Static. Then a voice. "Commander Marks, you're clear to board, Lieutenant." "Watch your back out there." Michael Calder. "Copy that. Hammer 6 moving." Admiral Wexler, younger. "Maintain radio discipline. No chatter until cargo is verified." So far it matched the official record. Calder leaned closer. Footsteps, creaking metal, heavy breathing. Then a sudden muffled argument in the background. Unknown officer. This isn't part of the manifest. Marks. Shut it down. You weren't cleared for this frequency. Clicked and a pause. Then another voice cut in, calm and commanding. Wexler. Proceed as planned. If they find it, we deny everything. Calder froze. He replayed the last line. Wexler. Proceed as planned. If they find it, we deny everything. The voice was unmistakable. He sat back slowly, every breath a struggle. His fingers tightened around the table's edge until his knuckles whitened. Wexler hadn't just known. He'd ordered it. Flashback. The bridge of the USS Hawthorne. 1983, the storm was at its peak. Wexler stood by the comms console, headset clamped tight, eyes burning with the pressure of command. The bridge lights flickered red. Get me Marks, he barked. Sir, we've lost signal from Hammer 6. Then re-establish it. I want visual confirmation before we move in. Marks's voice crackled through. Commander, I'm reading a surge in the auxiliary grid. You want me to cut power? No, Wexler said sharply. Keep her online. The package must remain intact. Sir, that's unstable ordnance. That's an order. For a heartbeat, there was only static. Then a faint reply. Understood. Seconds later, the ship shuddered, and then white light. Back to present. Seaside Inn Calder sat in darkness now. The lamp had flickered out, leaving only the faint blue wash of dawn leaking through the curtains. He didn't move. The sound of his son's voice from the tape still echoed in his skull. He reached into the folder again, finding the last page, a classified memo from 1984. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable. Rear Admiral John R. Wexler. Operation Falcon Star is to be sealed indefinitely. Public narrative, munitions malfunction. Do not pursue internal inquiry. He folded the paper carefully, as though it might shatter. Then, from somewhere deep within him, a bitter laugh rose and died in his throat. The man who had spoken of duty and silence, the same man who'd begged forgiveness hours ago, had been the architect of it all. At sunrise, Calder stepped outside. The air was cold and clean, the storm having washed the sky to a pale, fragile blue. He looked out across the empty parking lot toward the water beyond the dunes. The Navy base was only a few miles down the coast. Somewhere out there, under those calm grey waves, lay the wreck of the Falcon Star, a grave without a headstone. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the compass, and flicked the lid open. The needle trembled, pointing north, unwavering, absolute. True north, his son had said. For the first time, Calder understood what he'd meant. It wasn't about direction. It was about truth. He went back inside, gathered the tapes, the memo, and Wexler's sealed envelope. He slipped them into a weathered duffel bag, zipped it shut, and stared at the door. He knew what he had to do. Scene transition. Naval headquarters. Norfolk. The sun was barely up when Wexler arrived at his office. He looked tired, older than he had the day before. Sleep hadn't come. He'd spent the night staring at the ceiling, haunted by voices that had never really gone silent. He sat behind his desk, straightened the flag pin on his uniform, and whispered, "God forgive me." The door opened without warning. Calder stepped inside. The duffel slung over his shoulder. Wexler's eyes widened. "Chief, I told you." "You told me enough," Calder interrupted. He dropped the bag onto the desk. "You left this part out." He unzipped it. The tapes, the memo, and the compass slid into view. Wexler stared. "Where did you get those?" "From Cooper," Calder said. "He kept them safe all these years. Safer than you kept my son." The Admiral's face paled. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Calder said. "You traded men's lives for stability. You buried the truth because it was inconvenient." Wexler leaned forward, voice breaking. "You think I wanted that explosion? You think I haven't heard their voices every night since?" Calder's tone softened, just barely. "Then why lie to me all these years?" "Because the Navy needed a hero, not a ghost story," Wexler said. "Because your son's death gave meaning to the men who stayed. And because I was too much of a coward to face you." He looked down at the compass. "He was the best officer I ever had." Calder's eyes glistened, but his voice stayed steady. Then let him rest with the truth. He turned to leave. Wexler called out after him. "What will you do with this?" Calder paused at the door. "What he'd have done," he said. "Tell the truth and take the consequences." He walked out, leaving the Admiral alone with the ghosts of his command. That night, a message left the base, encrypted, unsigned, addressed to the Department of Naval Oversight. Attached were 3 files: the tapes, the memo, and a statement simply marked, "For record, Michael Calder, retired Chief Engineer, USS Hawthorne." By dawn, the message would be opened. By noon, the silence would finally break. By morning, the truth was no longer contained. At precisely 0730, a classified communique reached the Pentagon's Naval Oversight Division. The subject line was sterile: "Re-archived materials, Operation Falcon Star." Inside were the tapes, the memo, and Calder's recorded statement. It was signed simply, "Michael A. Calder, Chief Engineer, Retribute, USS Hawthorne." The room went silent when the playback began. 3 men and 1 woman sat around the oval briefing table, uniformed, composed, but visibly shaken as Wexler's voice filled the speakers. "Proceed as planned. If they find it, we deny everything." The static that followed seemed to echo forever. Finally, Rear Admiral Donnelly broke the silence. "Jesus Christ, that's Wexler." The Director of Oversight leaned forward. "When was this?" "March 17th, 1983, replied Commander Lee, scanning the transcript. "The Falcon Star incident," Donnelly exhaled slowly. 42 years ago. 42 years, Lee repeated, "and he's been sitting on this the whole time." The director's eyes narrowed. "Get me Norfolk Command, now." Scene cut, Norfolk. 09:45 hours. Wexler sat alone in his office, staring at the folded flag on the credenza, the same flag he had handed to Calder decades earlier. He hadn't worn his jacket yet. The ribbons and bars looked wrong this morning, heavy with ghosts. His intercom buzzed. "Admiral, it's Captain Rhodes from the Pentagon. Secure line." Wexler hesitated before pressing the button. "Patch him through, John," Rhodes said softly. "I just listened to the tapes." A pause. Wexler's throat tightened. "Then you already know." "Yes," Rhodes replied. "And so does Oversight." "How bad?" Rhodes sighed. "Bad enough that the Secretary's office is convening a preliminary inquiry. They want you in Washington by 1800. Wexler looked toward the window. Beyond the base, the sea shimmered like a polished blade. "Understood," he said. "John," Rhodes added, "if there's anything you want to say before this becomes official record, now's the time." There was a long silence. "I made a call I thought would save lives," Wexler said finally. It didn't. Scene cut, Calder's house, outer Norfolk. The small coastal home was quiet except for the ticking of an old mantel clock. Calder had been up since dawn, pacing the kitchen floor, the phone untouched on the counter. The weight that had lived in his chest for decades was gone. But in its place was something else. An ache, not of guilt, but of finality. He glanced at the photograph on the wall, his son in uniform, smiling beneath the brim of his cap. "I did it, kid," Calder whispered. "They'll know what really happened now." The phone rang. He froze, then picked it up. "Chief Calder?" "Yes, this is Commander Lee from Naval Oversight. Sir, I wanted to personally inform you that your statement has been received and authenticated. An inquiry is being scheduled." Calder's grip tightened. "And Wexler?" "He's been summoned to Washington." Calder nodded slowly. "Then it's finally done. Chief," Lee continued, "your cooperation is appreciated. There may be follow-up questions in the coming days. We'd also like to request your presence at the inquiry as a historical witness." Calder hesitated. "You think I've got something left to add?" "Yes, sir," Lee said quietly. "You're the only one who still remembers it the way it really was." Calder's gaze fell back to the photo. "All right, Commander. I'll be there." Interlude. Flashback, 1983. A young Michael Calder stood in the rain-soaked hangar, helmet under his arm, watching the recovery crews unload wreckage from the Falcon Star. He could still smell the fuel, the ozone, the burning metal. An officer approached, younger Wexler, expression grim but composed. "Chief Calder," he said. Your team's report stays with me. Understood? Calder blinked. Sir, that's not standard. Understood? Wexler repeated, his voice cutting through the downpour. Calder saluted. Aye, sir. It was the first time he'd ever felt ashamed to obey an order. Back to present, Highway 64. Late afternoon, Wexler drove north toward Washington, the black sedan cutting through miles of gray coastline. His uniform hung beside him on the back seat, untouched. The sky darkened as he passed the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. He thought about the men he'd buried under silence. The medals, the ceremonies, the speeches about duty and sacrifice, all built on a lie. He'd convinced himself it had been necessary. But hearing his own voice again had broken that illusion forever. His phone buzzed. Unknown number, he answered. Wexler. A familiar voice came through. Steady, weary, unmistakable. Admiral, it's Calder. Wexler's grip tightened on the wheel. Chief, I wasn't expecting... I don't want your apology, Calder said. You already gave me that. Wexler said nothing. I just want you to know, Calder continued. I'm coming to DC too, and when they ask me what happened out there, I'm going to tell them everything. The line went quiet. Then Wexler spoke, voice low. Then maybe we'll both find peace at last, Calder hesitated. Peace doesn't come from truth, Admiral. It comes from owning it. And with that, he hung up. Scene cut. Washington, D.C., 1840. Hours, the storm that had swept through Norfolk was now crawling over the capital. The marble steps of the Pentagon glistened with rain. Two men arrived separately, one in full-dress uniform, the other in a simple grey coat. Neither spoke as they entered the building. Security cameras captured the moment they crossed paths in the hallway. One man carried a briefcase. The other carried a folded compass in his hand. Neither saluted. Neither looked away. For the first time in 40 years, they were walking toward the same room, not as officer and subordinate, but as two men bound by the same ghosts. That night, as the inquiry began behind closed doors, the Navy's oldest secret finally came up for air, and somewhere, far out at sea, beneath 50 feet of black water, a rusted hull still bore the name Falcon Star. The ocean kept its silence, but the men who built that silence no longer could. The inquiry chamber was colder than either man expected. Reinforced glass walls. Fluorescent light reflected off polished oak. Every sound carried, the shuffle of papers, the metallic click of a pen, the low hum of the air vent. Rear Admiral Donnelly presided at the center of the table, flanked by 3 officers and a legal advisor. No cameras, no reporters, only the 2 men who had once served under the same flag, one decorated, one discarded. At precisely 1900 hours, Donnelly spoke. This session is classified under Section 7 of Naval Conduct. Admiral John Wexler and Chief Engineer Michael Calder, you are both here to testify regarding events surrounding Operation Falcon Star. March 1983. Both men nodded. Donnelly's gaze moved between them. Admiral, you requested to make an opening statement. Wexler stood slowly. His movements were careful, as if every inch of his posture bore the weight of decades. He looked at Calder first. Chief Calder, he began, voice low but clear. For 40 years, I have lived with a decision that cost good men their names. I justified it as duty, as protection, as national necessity. But that was cowardice wrapped in uniform. The words hung heavy in the sterile air. He turned to the board. Gentlemen, the truth is simple. I authorized the suppression of evidence after the Falcon Star incident. I destroyed a report that confirmed a systems failure caused by contractor negligence, not crew error. Those men died innocent. I covered it to save a program and my career. Donnelly's pen stopped mid-motion. You are admitting to falsifying command reports? Yes, sir, Wexler said, and I am ready to accept whatever this board deems fit. There was a murmur across the table. Restrained, professional, but unmistakably human. Wexler continued. I once told a young engineer that truth was a weapon. Tonight, I use it to end what I began. He sat down. Calder didn't move for several seconds. The silence was absolute, the kind that makes men aware of their own breathing. Then he stood. Permission to speak freely? Granted, said Donnelly. Calder's voice carried differently. It wasn't loud, but it had the gravity of something immovable. Admiral Wexler is telling you the truth. But you should also know, I stayed silent because I let him. He paused, eyes lowering to his calloused hands. He gave me an order that day, and I followed it. I could have refused. I could have gone to command, but I didn't, because I was angry and tired, and I told myself I'd done enough for this Navy. He looked up. But I didn't do enough for my men. The room stayed still. You all wear the uniform, Calder said. You know what that means. It means you don't get to pick when it's convenient to stand for what's right. Donnelly's tone softened. Chief Calder, your actions were mine, Calder cut in gently. And I own them. Same as he owns his. He turned to Wexler. Their eyes met. No rank between them now. You remember Jenkins, sir? Calder asked quietly. Wexler nodded once. He was 24. 24, Calder repeated. He died thinking he'd made a mistake that killed his crew. His family never got the truth. That's what this is about. Not medals, not careers. Just that boy's name. The rain intensified outside, a dull percussion against the glass. The board conferred briefly in hushed voices. Finally, Donnelly leaned forward. Gentlemen, the Oversight Division will recommend full declassification of Operation Falcon Star and the correction of all personnel records. Admiral Wexler, your resignation will be accepted with forfeiture of pension benefits pending review. Chief Calder, you are to receive an amended service commendation for integrity and testimony. Both men nodded. Neither spoke. Then Donnelly added, almost under his breath, Gentlemen, for what it's worth, the Navy still honors those who have the courage to face their ghosts. Wexler stood again. Permission to address Chief Calder before adjournment. Granted. Wexler turned, his voice unsteady but sincere. Chief, I am sorry. For the order I gave, for the silence I demanded, and for the years it stole from you. Calder studied him. Then with a faint nod he replied, And I'm sorry I waited so long to make you face it. There was no handshake. Just mutual understanding, the kind that exists only between men who have walked through fire and come out scarred, but standing. As they exited the chamber, the corridor lights dimmed for the night cycle. The world outside was still washed in rain, streetlights flickering against the marble. Wexler stopped near the entrance, glancing at Calder. You going back to Norfolk? Aye, Calder said. Got a house full of silence waiting for me. Wexler exhaled, eyes distant. I used to think silence was peace. Now I know it's penance. Calder's reply was quiet. Sometimes they're the same thing, Admiral. Wexler almost smiled, not from joy but from relief. He saluted, not out of formality but out of respect. Calder returned it, slow and deliberate. Then both men walked out into the night, two shadows merging briefly under the same dim light before parting down separate paths. Later, as Wexler's car disappeared into the city, Calder paused by the reflecting pool outside the Pentagon. The rain had eased, leaving ripples on the water. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small, dented compass, the one Jenkins had carried. He opened it, and the needle trembled, pointing north. North, Calder whispered as if to himself. Still true. He closed it, placed it gently in his coat, and turned toward the distant lights of Norfolk. The wind over Norfolk was gentle that morning, the kind that carries both salt and memory. At the far edge of the pier, a flag rose slowly up the mast. The horizon glowed with early sunlight, turning the Atlantic into a sheet of molten gold. A small crowd had gathered near the memorial wall, officers, civilians, and a handful of veterans wearing the faces of men who had seen too much and spoken too little. Among them stood Michael Calder, his posture still straight despite the years. His coat fluttered lightly in the breeze. Beside him, a folded paper rested on the granite slab. A printed notice bearing the headline, Operation Falcon Star, declassified, crew exonerated. Below it were the names, Jenkins, Torres, Lewis McAdams, etched forever into stone, now finally cleared of blame. Calder reached out and traced the letters with the back of his fingers. 42 years late, he murmured, but home all the same. A voice behind him answered softly. "Some truths need time to surface, Chief," Calder turned. Admiral John Wexler stood a few feet away, not in uniform, just a dark coat and a face stripped of rank. Calder nodded slowly. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure I deserved to," Wexler replied. They stood in silence for a long moment, the sound of the gulls circling above and the hum of base activity distant but ever present, like the Navy itself, endless and alive. "I submitted my final papers last week," Wexler said. "Resignation accepted. They offered to let me keep my commission title as honorary, but—" He shook his head. "I don't need it anymore." Calder's expression softened. "So what now?" "I'm heading west," Wexler said. "There's a veterans rehabilitation project in San Diego. Thought I'd do some work with them. Maybe build something honest this time." Calder smiled faintly. "That sounds about right." A young lieutenant approached, saluting sharply. "Gentlemen, the ceremony's ready to begin," Calder nodded. "We'll be right there." As the officer walked away, Wexler's gaze drifted toward the stage. "They asked me to say a few words," he said quietly. Calder raised an eyebrow. "You plan to?" Wexler hesitated. "Not sure I can." Calder looked him in the eye. "Then don't speak for them, Admiral. Speak for the men you buried." Minutes later, the crowd stood in reverent silence as Wexler stepped up to the podium. The sea wind carried his voice, calm but trembling with weight. 42 years ago, he began, a crew gave everything they had under my command. And when the world demanded answers, I failed to give them the truth. The audience remained still. Only the sound of the flag rope tapping against the pole broke the silence. But truth has a way of waiting, Wexler continued. It waited through storms, through silence, through the long, quiet nights of regret. And when it came back to me, it did not come as punishment. It came as mercy. He paused, scanning the faces. Sailors, widows, sons, grandsons. I stand before you not as an admiral, but as a man forgiven by those who had every reason not to. His gaze found Calder in the crowd. And to the man who reminded me what duty truly means. And thank you. He stepped back, his eyes glassy, his hands trembling slightly as he saluted the names on the memorial wall. After the ceremony, the pier began to empty. The crowd dispersed quietly, leaving only the sound of the waves lapping against the hulls. Calder remained, watching the sunlight creep higher. Wexler approached once more, holding something wrapped in cloth. "I wanted to give you this," he said. He unfolded the cloth, revealing a tarnished brass tag with 2 words engraved in it. Hammer 6. Calder blinked. "You kept it. It was your call sign during the Falcon Star run," Wexler said. "When your signal went dark that night, the recovery team logged it as Hammer 6, presumed lost. I kept it as a reminder." Calder took the tag, his thumb brushing over the letters. "That was a long time ago," Wexler nodded. "Still true, though." Calder looked out at the sea. "Hammer 6 was the one who never quit. That's what my men called me, stubborn as a hammer." He smiled faintly. "Never thought it'd outlive me." "Symbols have a way of doing that," Wexler said. Calder pocketed the tag, closing his hand around it. "Then maybe it's time I passed it on." He looked toward the young lieutenant standing near the ramp, the same one who'd saluted them earlier. "Lieutenant," he called. The officer jogged over. "Sir." Calder placed the brass tag in his hand. "Keep this. It belonged to the men who served before you. Remember what it cost to wear it." The lieutenant looked at it, then at Calder. "Aye, Chief." When the young man walked away, Wexler smiled. "You just handed him a story that'll outlast both of us." "That's the point," Calder said quietly. "The Navy keeps moving, Admiral, but sometimes it needs to remember where it's been." They stood side by side for a final moment, facing the open sea. Calder broke the silence first. "You know, John, I used to think the worst part of growing old was being forgotten." Wexler turned. "And now?" Calder's eyes glimmered against the sun. "Now I think it's realizing how much you remember." Wexler gave a slow nod. "Then we remember for them." "For them," Calder echoed. The 2 men saluted the horizon. One final gesture. Precise and steady, their silhouettes framed against the gold morning light, and as the flag reached the top of the mast, the wind caught it. unfurling fully, alive again, just as a distant aircraft thundered overhead, its sound rolling across the bay like the echo of history itself. For a brief moment, Calder could almost hear the voices of his old crew beneath the roar. Jenkins laughing, Torres calling out coordinates, McAdams shouting, "Hammer 6, clear for takeoff." He closed his eyes, let the sound wash through him, and whispered, barely audible, "Hammer 6! Mission complete. If this story moved you, take a moment to remember the veterans whose quiet courage shaped the world we inherited.